all the good qualities of meditation. And so just allow yourself to enjoy, allow yourself these positive qualities, and gradually, with patience, meditation sort of emerges by itself. And as you allow the mind to calm down, and you allow the world to fade into the rear view window, so to speak, just make sure that you know how to stabilize the mind in the right way, to work with the mind in the way that is appropriate to what is going on. So if you do feel quite naturally a bit dull or tired or whatever, then the right thing to do is to inspire the mind, turn the mind to some inspirational thing. Again, the idea that you are in a place with Kalyana Mittas, that you have a place to develop your spiritual practice, the fact that you are living a good life, keeping the precepts, whatever it might be, the fact that you have done acts of generosity and kindness in your life. All of these things are inspiring. And if you reflect on these things in the right way, not in a way where the ego is gratified, but in a way where you feel a kind of peaceful satisfaction with your own life, knowing that you live well, then the mind tends to brighten up. So just dwell on these things very gently, not by thinking a lot, but just by nudging your mind in that direction, allowing that feeling of good feelings inside just to spread through your body and mind. And as you do that, giving rise to a bit of energy. And then when the energy arises, the breath often comes to mind. And then you can start practicing with the breath. Don't use the breath if you feel dull, because it's not going to work. On the other hand, if the mind is very restless, then the breath can be a useful thing to move you in the right direction. And then, if there is dullness, go back to the inspiring object. So know how to work with the mind. And then gradually, as the clarity of the mind emerges, the breath will come into view. And when the breath comes into view, you're already doing breath meditation. But make sure you don't grasp the breath. If you grasp it, if you hold on to it, if it is too close to you, it is going to be uncomfortable. It is not going to be relaxed and easy. It is as if you're observing something from a distance, something you don't own, like seeing a tree far away, or seeing a mountain or a sunset, something you're just observing that you cannot control. In the same way, it is a breath, it's like the wind in the trees, something that isn't yours. You're just present with the breath, and that is all. Okay, so coming close to the end of the meditation, and as always, before you come out, just take a few moments just to take stock of how the meditation works. How do you become more peaceful? How does the mind become more bright? What does it mean to let go? How do you use your perception in the right way? These are the critical things that allow the mind to become peaceful. Okay, everyone. So let's take a 10-minute break and we'll carry on after 10 minutes. Okay, are you ready? Yeah, are you sure? Yeah. You don't know what you're in for. Yeah, today is going to be a little bit different. So the title for today's talk, or this actually series of talk, is like a workshop, is to have a look at the Vinaya Pitaka, which is a kind of slightly different kind of literature from the suttas. And so the idea is to kind of diversify a little bit, look at a few different things, because when you look at a few different things, it broadens your understanding and your outlook, and you get the kind of more maybe rounded view of what the Dhamma is about. And that is the purpose of today's workshop. So we'll see what happens. So the just to start out, just to give you an idea for those of you, is anyone here who is kind of new to the suttas and to Dhamma, or are you all been around for a while? Everyone been around for a while? Okay, good. I know that many of you have been around for a while because I have seen you around for a while, which is great. Which is wonderful. Yeah, I mean, one of the things about the Dhamma and the teaching of the Buddha is that you want to be consistent over a long period of time, because when you are consistent over a long period of time, that's when you get results in this practice. So it's great to see people coming back, and it's great to see that continuation in the practice. So the idea today is that there's three kinds of literature, if you like, or the suttas or the teachings are divided into three categories. And this is why it's called the Pitaka. T means three, Pitaka means a basket. So you have three baskets. And a basket basically is a collection. Yeah, it's a collection. So you have three collections. And the first collection, and by far the most important one, is the Sutta Pitaka, the collection of suttas. And that's what we almost always look at. And that's what I really would recommend you to focus on, those suttas. Even among those suttas, there are some that are more interesting than others. But we're not going to go into detail about that right now. Then the second class, actually, this is actually the first class, usually the way it goes. Vinaya usually goes first. And Vinaya, that's the rules and regulations of the monastic order. So that's what we're going to look at today. Doesn't sound all that exciting, right? It sounds pretty boring. Rules and regulations, actually. Maybe you made a mistake by coming today. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But actually, it's more interesting than what you might expect. I'll get back to that in a second, because there are lots of other things going on as well in the Vinaya, apart from rules and regulations. And then the third basket is the Abhidhamma, yeah, which is like the systematic teachings or the philosophical teachings, if you like. I would often call that philosophy, because that's really what it is. It's a kind of a systematization of the various principles and the various ways in which the Dhamma are taught in the suttas. And that is not something I usually look at. First of all, because I don't know that much about the Abhidhamma, and secondly, because I don't think it is really critical to know much about it. So the Vinaya Pitaka is a mixture of rules and regulations, and many of these would go back to the time of the Buddha. The main rules are known as the Patimokkha rules. Yeah, Patimokkha rules is the rules that we recite in the monastery on every 𝑢posatha day, the full moon day and the new moon day. We recite them. In our monastery in Perth, we have maybe 4 or 5 monks, maybe 6 monks now, who recite those rules by heart. Yeah, so you sit down and you recite them for maybe 45 minutes, and you just kind of continuously recite Pali. Or these days we also do it in English as well, and that's kind of cool to listen to. Yeah, sit there listening to the kind of someone recite Pali for 45 minutes. It's quite nice. And you may think that that sounds difficult because you have to memorize so much, but actually it's not that hard to do. You'll be surprised. I think most people here probably will be able to do that if you put your mind to it. Because, I don't know, when you're interested in something, then you can usually do it. So this is kind of the core of the Vinaya, these rules. Then there's something else in the Vinaya called kind of the regulations, which is how the monastic community operates together, how the monastic community makes decisions. And the monastic community is a democratic community. In fact, it is more than democratic. Everyone has to agree. So if you want to be really difficult, you can object to decisions, and then nothing can be done, right? So don't do this in the BF Panghong because you're never going to get anything done if everyone has to agree. It's really hard. But it works. This is kind of the weird thing. And one of the reasons why it works is because in the monastic community, very often you have certain people who have a very natural authority. And obviously, in our monastery in Perth, that is someone like Ajahn Brahm. Yeah, if Ajahn Brahm says something, you might disagree, but if he is kind of fairly insistent that this is important, most people will say, okay, well, if Ajahn Brahm says, okay, let's do it that way. And so you have a certain natural authority with people. In ordinary society, not so common to have natural authority. Very often authority is what they call assumed authority, is when you say, I want authority, and you take it, right? Like maybe a dictator or something like that. And there seems to be more and more dictators in the world these days. And then you have what is called conferred authority, where someone is like voted in or something, yeah? And then you are kind of given that position. Like Panghong, you have conferred authority, I suppose, yeah? Yeah. Maybe you have some natural authority as well, I don't know, but you certainly have the conferred authority. So that's kind of how the committees work. But in the monastery, you have a lot of natural authority, especially if you have very good monastics in the monastery, and then people will listen to them. And that's, I think, how it works quite well. And then hopefully people are reasonably mature, they know when to shut up, yeah? And then it kind of works as a consequence. So these are the two main things that you find. And these things probably actually with quite a high degree of certainty, they go back to the time of the Buddha himself, because these things only have authority precisely because they were laid down by the Buddha. So we follow these regulations, like the ordination ceremony. Yeah? These are Sangha kammas. These are decisions made by the Sangha. But then in the Vinaya, you also have a large number of things that are kind of where some of it is maybe laid down by the Buddha, some of it is later, the stories that kind of surround these things. So the Patimokkha rules, for example, you have a lot of description, how they are supposed to be understood. These are like interpretations, the definitions of words, interpretations of how they are to be practiced, and then stories that lead up to the laying down of the rule, yeah? And when you see the stories that lead up to the lay, that's a very interesting stories, because these stories, they tell you about all the naughty things that the monastics were up to, right? So if you want to read about the naughty monastics, in the suttas you get all about the good monastics. In the Vinaya you get the dodgy monastics, yeah? And so you see the real humanity, because people are people. People are not perfect. And so not everyone is going to be an arahant. At the time of the Buddha, there were many dodgy people as well, just as there is today. Nothing has really changed there. And that's And that's kind of, it's nice to know that. It's important, it's good because it makes the suttas and the whole idea of the early monastic community more approachable. They are more like us. Yeah, they're not some kind of super duper arahants, everyone. They are like ordinary people. That's kind of good to know because it means we don't feel alienated from the Dhamma as if we can't do it because in the present day everyone is so corrupt, but in those days everyone was so pure. Actually, it isn't like that. People have always been people. The reason you get reborn as a human being is because you are a mixture of good and bad qualities. And that those were human beings then, they are human beings now. So the same kind of reason why we are here. And so we're going to look at some of those stories later on of the kind of, and not straight away, because if I give you these stories straight away, then we might get a bit distracted by stories. I'm going to give those more towards the end as a bit of entertainment when everyone is a bit exhausted towards the end. So see some of those stories. But what I want to start out with is the framework for a part of the Vinaya called the Khandhaka. And the Khandhaka is where all the regulations, not the rules, but the regulations are laid down, the ordination procedure, these kind of things. And what is interesting about the Khandhakas, Khandhaka just means chapter, yes, it's called the chapters basically. What is interesting about these, that they are framed within the life of the Buddha. Yeah, that's the framework for the Khandhakas. And so here you get the story of the Buddha. This is one of the most kind of detailed stories of the Buddha that you find in the canonical literature. And it is a little bit later than the suttas. You can see there's a little bit more kind of supernormal stuff and a little bit more just narrative and stories and things. But it's still fairly close to the very earliest part of Buddhism. And the reason why these Khandhakas are framed with the life of the Buddha is because it is from the life of the Buddha that you get the emerging of the Sangha. And when you get the emerging of the Sangha, by Sangha I mean the monastic community, right? When you get the emerging of the Sangha, that's where you have to lay down the rules and regulations. So they come out after the Buddha's awakening. Well, how does the Sangha actually start? How then do the regulations and rules start? They all are connected to the life story of the Buddha. And that's why that is a framework for these regulations. So the Vinaya, for that reason, begins with the awakening of the Buddha. That's where it starts. Yeah, it starts there, and then it goes all the way to the passing away of the Buddha, and then even goes beyond the passing away of the Buddha to what is known as the first and the second councils that were done after the Buddha's time when they recited the Dhamma and the Vinaya to make sure it lasted for future generations. Who are those future generations? That's us. Exactly, yeah? So that's why we can thank them for doing those things at that time so that we are available to us. So let's look at the very beginning, how this whole thing started. Yeah, let's look at the what happened straight after the awakening of the Buddha and see how things develop, because this is kind of, I don't know, I find this very nice myself. So let's get going. So here we are. Okay. Does it say anything? It doesn't say anything on the screen here. No. How come this? Why is the screen nothing showing on the screen there? Do, do I need to put it on dual? Is it a matter of what is the reason? Is it this one here? Duplicate? That one there? Yeah. Yeah. No, I get rid of this one first. I'm not sure. That's not supposed to be there. Yeah. This one. Let's try again. Nola. Unplug, yeah. Where did you go now? No. This is not the right one. Yeah. So that's okay. Yeah. Got it? Okay, it's coming. Good. Oh, so much. Yeah, there we are. Okay, that's good. If you're going to go to duplicate. Okay, it doesn't matter that much actually. We can always do this without the screen there. Is there something else that is not connected? There we are. Okay. Yeah. I had a lucky break. That's good. It's always something simple, right? Like it isn't connected properly or something. That's good. Yeah. Okay. So now just I'm gonna have some coffee first of all. Surprise, surprise. Okay. Okay. So this is now we're going to have a look at how this whole thing begins. How it starts out. So, again, so this then begins with the story of the Buddha just after his awakening. Yeah, and this is what we have, what we find. This is called the Great Chapter, the Maha Khandhaka, and it begins with the account with the Bodhi tree. Yeah, so the Buddha reached his awakening under the Bodhi tree, and that's why that's where we're all starting. Yeah. So. Here we go. Soon after his awakening, the Buddha was staying at Uruvela on the bank of the river Naranjara at the foot of a Bodhi tree. There the Buddha sat cross-legged for 7 days without moving, experiencing the bliss of freedom. Let's stop there because there's a lot. That's already very nice. Yeah, so after his awakening, and for those of you who came to India recently or have been to India before, you have been to the banks of the river Naranjara. Yeah, it's right there even in the present day, quite an impressive river. And the Buddha sitting at the foot of the Bodhi tree here. Yeah, the Bodhi, the awakening tree, called the Asatta in Pali, but then becomes known as the Bodhi tree. And in Latin, it is known as the Ficus religiosa. Yeah, the religious fig tree. Yeah, that's kind of nice name for it. And so this is obviously happening right after the awakening, and there the Buddha sat cross-legged for 7 days without moving, experiencing the bliss of freedom. That's pretty amazing. 7 days without moving. So that's what happens when you are recently awakened. You just want to enjoy, you just want to sit back, you don't really want to do very much because it is just, you're so blissed out, you're so happy with what has happened. Yeah, you have reached the end of all defilements. And this is probably what the Buddha would have wanted to do for the rest of his life. Just, enjoying the happiness of becoming fully awakened. And this is it's kind of very, very powerful. Yeah, the idea that the Buddha, after his awakening, he has found the meaning of life, he has found the highest kind of happiness, but then still he decides to teach. Yeah, for the Buddha, that is a problem to teach. Yeah, teaching, meeting people, they're going to argue with you. Yeah, they're not going to be happy. You see this in the suttas, people coming up to argue with the Buddha. The Buddha famously says, I don't argue with anyone in the world. It's the world that argues with me. Yeah. And that's basically true, right? That's kind of how things happen. And so the Buddha doesn't really want to teach, but because he has discovered the truth, because he has discovered the answer to suffering and happiness and all of these kind of things, he is moved by compassion for the world, and that's why he decides to teach. And I always like to make this point because it shows that when the Buddha decides to teach, it's a very pure thing. It's purely driven by compassion. It is not driven by any kind of ulterior motive that he wants to be famous or he wants anything at all. It's purely out of compassion. In fact, the Buddha would rather not, but he does it anyway. And what that means is that when you read the suttas, there is nothing there that has any kind of wrong kind of motive. He's not driven. Anything he says is purely comes out of this movement of compassion and nothing else. And that means that when you read the sutras, you don't have to be skeptical. You don't have to think maybe something is dodgy or something isn't relevant or whatever. Everything is relevant. Everything is about helping people to emerge from suffering and to attain happiness in their lives. Everything comes from a very pure and beautiful place. So he's sitting for 7 days without moving. Yeah, so obviously very profound meditation, experiencing the bliss of freedom. Yeah, the bliss of freedom, the idea of freedom. I think sometimes we need to kind of stop and to reflect on what some of these terms actually mean. Yeah, so the Buddha is experiencing the bliss of freedom. And I don't know about you, but I think in my experience, most people, they have the idea of freedom is a very beautiful word because everyone wants to be free. No one really wants to be in jail. Anyone wants to be in jail? No. Have you been to Changi prison before? I've been to Changi prison. Wow, a scary place. Yeah, I've been there not because I was an inmate, Wilson, because I was visiting an inmate. I was visiting someone who was a Buddhist who was in prison. So the BF, or I can't remember, someone took me from here and it took me to Changi, and all the steel and the concrete and the number of locks and the special cars that you need to get in there. I was really happy when I got out again afterwards because I think I want to get stuck in that prison with so much, security or what have you. And so being in jail is not a pleasant thing, in Changi, or wherever it might be that you are in jail. But the point is that we are in jail right now without really knowing it. This is the weird thing. The five sense world, limits the mind. It kind of causes the mind to be contracted and constrained within these five senses. And part of the idea of practicing meditation is to liberate the mind from that world. We don't really know, we don't understand what that lack of freedom actually is, or being constrained by these five senses. We don't understand because we often don't have the alternative experience where the mind is liberated from these things. The mind that is liberated from the five senses is an expansive mind. It's a mind without limits. It's a mind that is full of joy, because that is joyful to get released from those five senses. And so we don't understand, this fact of imprisonment right here and right now. And there's a vast number of kinds of imprisonment in this world. Obviously, part of the imprisonment is just having dukkha, having suffering. If you are depressed or sad, or someone has died in your family or whatever, you feel a sorrow because that is a kind of imprisonment right there. You're imprisoned by the sorrow and by the suffering or by the depressions of life. So that's a kind of sorrow. So one of the freedoms is the freedom from all kinds of suffering. But then there is the broader kind of imprisonment, or just being imprisoned by the world itself. We think it is a good fun to travel around the world. You want to travel here and where, you want to see all the varieties of the world. And like Ajahn Brahm likes to say, you're just seeing different colors in your prison cell. You're painting your prison cell pink. Yay, pink prison cell. You go to Changi prison, can I please paint my prison cell pink? They'll probably tell you no, but I mean, at least, in this kind of prison, you can kind of color your prison cell. You can travel here. Actually, it is all just more of the same kind of prison from the Buddhist point of view. And so this is the whole idea. When you liberate yourself from all of these kind of things, we don't understand the world. And because we don't understand the world, that is one of the reasons why we don't understand the urgency of this practice. Getting out of this problem. Only when you get out of it, you get a feeling, a taste of freedom. That is when you understand what the problem really was. And then you get powerfully motivated to get out of this. So the Buddha is just sitting there experiencing the bliss of freedom, the vimutti sukha, the happiness or joy of freedom. And this is kind of what Buddhas do, I suppose, is part of that, or arahants or whatever. Anyway, so it's worthwhile contemplating words like this. Freedom is a beautiful word, and understanding the more profound aspects of it. And ultimately, of course, is the freedom from the sense of self. The sense of self is one of the great torturers in the world. It makes us take ourselves too seriously. It makes us become stupid. We identify with all kind of crazy things. And that's actually a very, very big problem. It's very hard to see that. We cherish the sense of self rather than get rid of it. And that is, of course, a problem. Okay, so let us move on. Then, in the first part of the night, the Buddha reflected on dependent origination in forward and reverse order. Actually, it should only be forward order, I think, first time around, in forward order. Yeah, so the Buddha is reflecting on dependent origination. Yeah, ignorance is the condition for intentional activities, sankhara. Intentional activities are the condition for consciousness, which then goes to name and form, goes to contact, the six sense bases, the contact, and then all the way up to dukkha, all the way to birth, which is the condition for old age and death, for grief, sorrow, pain, aversion, and distress to come to be. This is how there is the origin of this whole mass of suffering here. So this is the forward order of dependent origination here. So here the Buddha has reached awakening, yeah, and now he has to figure out how to tell the world about it. And that is not easy, because you can imagine what awakening is. Well, what is awakening? It's like you're sitting under the Bodhi tree and then, suddenly you reach this really profound state. It's like an insight, it's like a flash. One way is that the idea of awakening is expressed in the suttas. Is like a flash in the darkness of the night. This is how you become a stream enterer. You see, the flash goes on, and then you see for a moment, and it becomes dark again afterwards. And so it is this flash of insight, which basically is the awakening experience. And then you have to explain that to the world. Yeah, and that is why we have the suttas, not because the suttas are basically an articulation of that insight that someone has when they reach awakening. And that's why we have the suttas. And one of the most powerful ways that is expressed is through this sequence of dependent origination. In many ways, that is like the core insight of the Buddha is expressed through dependent origination. Like the Four Noble Truths are really just an expansion on this as well. They are kind of a way of looking at of this thing here. So, the Buddha is contemplating these things. He's maybe starting to think, what is it really that I have understood? And maybe his mind is already inclining towards teaching the world. If I'm going to teach this, how am I going to say this? According to the story, Brahma Sahampati has to come down and ask him first of all, but maybe he already started at this point to think, to reflect and contemplate about how to teach the Dhamma. And the way he does that is through the sequence of dependent origination. And this is why that sequence is quite interesting here. The basic idea of that sequence is that craving leads to rebirth. That's the basic idea of dependent origination. It's quite simple, actually, but then it's expanded into these 12 links. So this is what the Buddha does under the Bodhi tree, reflecting on all of these kind of things. And when he does that, he says, seeing the significance of this, the Buddha uttered a heartfelt exclamation. When things become clear to the energetic Brahmin who practices absorption, then all his doubts are dispelled, since he understands the natural order and its conditions. So heartfelt exclamation is an udana. So there is a whole book called the Udana in the Pali Suttas, and they are all kind of full of heartfelt exclamations. It's as if the Buddha gets inspired, inspired by something, and then he says something coming. It's like an emotional expression almost. And he sees kind of the dependent origination, and then he expresses this in this way. When things become clear to the energetic Brahmin who practices absorption, becoming clear here is the idea of vipassana, the idea of seeing things as they actually are. What is the Pali here? I can't remember the Pali here, but anyway, it doesn't matter what it is. To the energetic Brahmin who practices absorption. The idea here, you have the jhanas already. And it's always the idea that the jhana, the deep samadhi, the stillness of the mind, that is what enables the person to see things clearly. You find this everywhere in the suttas, and you find it right here, yeah, in the very first verses after the Buddha's awakening. Energy, absorption always goes together. Brahmin here, the word Brahmin here just means someone who has achieved the highest insight in Buddhism. It's just an alternative word for an arahant. Yeah, these are the spiritual Brahmin, not the Brahmin by birth, but the spiritual Brahmins, the Brahmins of the heart, if you like, or the Brahmins of insight is what is meant here. So when things become clear, yeah, to someone who practices absorption, then all your doubts are dispelled. Why? Because you see clearly. You understand the reality of things. No more doubts about what is good and what is bad, what are good teachings, what are bad teachings, what is the meaning of life, etc. All of that is completely dispelled. Why? Because you understand the natural Dhamma and its conditions. The Sahetu Dhamma. Hetu means like a cause. Yes, you understand the cause. So Sahetu means the Dhamma together with its causes. And the Dhamma here is like, in this case, is like dependent origination. Yeah, that's the Dhamma, because it signifies the insight of the Buddha. And the causes is because it is a causal sequence of things. Yeah, how everything kind of leads to something else. So understanding the Dhamma together with its conditions. The natural order can just be understood to be also just the nature of the world. You understand the nature of the world together with its causes. And so this is kind of, yeah, when you understand the nature of the world together with the causes, that's really all that there is to understand. It's very important to understand the causes, because that also gives rise to understand the solution to the problems. Because when you understand the causes, well, then you eliminate the causes, you can eliminate the problems. And so this is what is going on here. So when things become clear to the energetic Brahmin who practices absorption, then all his doubts are dispelled, since he understands the natural order with its conditions. So, yeah, I should maybe say that this is my translation. So if you don't like it, then anyway, this is the Vinaya Pitaka. So this is where it comes from. So, and that is the very beginning of after the awakening. Yeah, so you can see here the Buddha arising in the world, and the Dhamma kind of slowly coming into view. Yeah, the idea, of course, that the Dhamma are the teachings, and so then after the Buddha has arisen, the next step is for the Dhamma to arise. The Dhamma is the articulation of the Buddha's insight. The Dhamma depends on the Buddha. From the Buddha comes the Dhamma, and this is what we're starting to see here. In the middle part of the night, the Buddha again reflected on dependent origination in reverse order, and this is where we have the cessation sequence. It should actually be cessation order rather than reverse, I think. But with the complete fading away and the end of ignorance comes the end of intentional activities. And with the end of intentional activities comes the end of consciousness. And then stage by stage, all the way to the end, with the end of birth comes the end of old age and death. And the end of sorrow, lamentation, pain, aversion, and distress. This is how there is the end of this whole mass of suffering here. Seeing the significance of this, the Buddha uttered another heartfelt exclamation. When things become clear to the energetic Brahmin who practices absorption, then all his doubts are dispelled, since he has understood the end of the conditions. Yeah, you understand that the conditions, the causes that give rise to dukkha, can come to an end. They can be eliminated. Yeah, by eliminating avidya, by eliminating ignorance, you're ultimately eliminating suffering itself via the elimination of rebirth. So this is what he understands here. Yeah, dependent origination in forward and reverse order. So that tells you what you have to do. You have to eliminate ignorance, and you have to eliminate delusion. So do you want to be ignorant, or do you prefer to be not ignorant? Do you want to be deluded, or do you prefer not to be deluded? It's kind of obvious, isn't it? Yeah, delusion obviously is bad. Yeah, it's obviously not a good idea to be deluded because it means you end up making all kind of terrible decisions as a consequence. So you want to understand, yeah, and this is why the idea of wisdom is the highest spiritual faculties in Buddhism, because wisdom allows us to understand the world. That is how we understand the world, and everything else comes from that. Even kind of basic things like metta and karuna arise out of wisdom. So if you have a lot of metta and karuna already in your life, and you are a gentle and kind person, it means maybe you have more wisdom than you think. Yeah. Sometimes we don't know how much wisdom we have. Yeah. We don't understand. It's very hard to know wisdom sometimes. But you can know that in part by looking at your own qualities. If you are a person with many good qualities, it means you have a degree of wisdom. Maybe you don't, maybe it came from a past life or whatever. It may not be, it's not really your wisdom. Yeah, it gets conditioned into you, but at least there's something there. Yeah, so be happy about that. Don't be conceited about it, but be happy about it. That's kind of the idea here. One of the beautiful things about the Dhamma is that there's never anything to be conceited about. And the reason is because everything is conditioned into us. Yeah, and when you understand that, then you don't have the kind of compassion where you look down upon other people because they are inferior or suffering or whatever. You don't think like that anymore because you understand we're all moving through these things. And sometimes other people are in a bad state. Sometimes we are in a bad state. Yeah, and it's just cause and conditions evolving over time. And then you never get conceited about things. Instead, you have a more pure kind of compassion for the world. Okay. In the last part of the night, the Buddha again reflected on dependent origination now in forward and reverse order. Ignorance is the condition for intentional activities, etc. This is how there is the origin of the whole mass of suffering. And then you have the cessation order, yeah, with this fading away and cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of intentional activities, etc., etc. This is how there is the end of this whole mass of suffering here. Seeing the significance of this, the Buddha uttered another heartfelt exclamation. When things become clear to the energetic Brahmin who practices absorption, it's always the same idea. Yeah, this symbolizes the Noble Eightfold Path. Those first three lines are the Noble Eightfold Path from a different kind of viewpoint. Yeah, including the results of the path. He defeats the army of the Lord of Death, like the sun beaming in the sky. Isn't that nice? I love that. It's so beautiful. Yeah, when you practice the Noble Eightfold Path and things become clear to you, you reach the end of the path, you defeat the army of Mara. The Lord of Death is Mara, is my translation for Mara. I have vowed to translate all Pali words, so nothing is kind of missing. So Mara too gets translated. Not sure. So sorry, Mara, but that's so the Lord of Death, because Mara is related to the word for Marana, which means death. Yeah. So you defeat the Lord of Death, like the sun beaming in the sky. The Buddha is like beaming like the sun. The idea of the sun or light in Buddhism, of course, is related to the idea of wisdom. Because when the light goes on, the darkness is dispelled. The darkness is gone. And darkness is when you are ignorant, when you don't see, when you don't understand things. And the light goes on. And the more powerful that light is, the more it kind of gets rid of the darkness in all corners, everywhere. Yeah? So the sun beaming in the sky is like the more kind of powerful way of saying that there is light all the way around. The Buddha becomes this beaming sun in the world where ignorance is dispelled and wisdom takes its place instead. Yeah? This is kind of the idea of someone who reaches the awakening, the understanding the nature of reality. And this is the Buddha. Sometimes the Buddha in the suttas is called the adicca, adicca, which means like the sun again. So the Buddha is kind of that's right, the kinsman of the sun. What is it? What is it? The Pali word again? Adicca. Anyway, whatever. So it's something, the kinsman of the sun, right? He is like the relative of the sun. And this is kind of the same kind of idea. The Buddha is, Angirasa is another word for the Buddha. So Angi is like rays, yeah, it's related to the sun again. One of the famous epithets for the Buddha. This idea of light and beaming coming into the world. And then when you see that, when you see the Buddha, that's the kind of a little bit of feeling. Someone who is very radiant, someone who's very powerful. When you see the Buddha, it's like, wow, what happened? Yeah, this person is somehow different, very powerful faculties, a sense of someone who is extraordinary being in the world. And this is kind of the power of the Buddha in a sense. So, yeah, I just came from Vietnam before I came to Singapore. And in Vietnam, they were talking about how to create, harmony in the world, how to create less conflict, how we can kind of live together. And this is kind of a nice, because this was a Vesak celebration over there. And there were lots of kind of speeches and things given, and everyone was saying, oh yeah, we can be more mindful and we can create more harmony in the world, blah, blah, blah. No, oh, I'm being naughty. It is because, and so I kind of, sometimes you have to be the kind of the person who is a bit difficult on these kind of conferences. So I kind of raised my voice. And, well, everyone is talking about kind of how to live in greater harmony and how to use mindfulness to kind of create better lives and better society. But the Buddha said that we use mindfulness to become enlightened, to get out of the world, not to create a better world. So what is all this business about, creating better world out of mindfulness? And no one knew how to answer that question. It was really interesting. And everyone went quiet, right? And then finally someone said, oh yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, we should think about that for the future. That's a really important question. It was very interesting. Because you notice, and of course no one was quoting the suttas. Yeah, that was not actually. There was one fellow from Malaysia. He quoted the suttas. I thought it was really cool that he quoted the suttas. But generally, no. They all did research. They were all professors and doctors, and they all do research on mindfulness and how it works and all this kind of stuff. So this is kind of the problems very often. Yeah, we don't really look deeply enough at what the Dhamma really is about. And so I said, so my talk, because I also gave a talk at this conference, I said that, well, actually, the Buddha said that the world, yeah, or the violence in the world and the wars in the world can never be overcome. Yeah, we are giving this conference on how to overcome this thing, but the Buddha said it can never be overcome. Yeah, it actually says that in the Sakapanya Sutta because it's rooted in the sense of self. And that is why that gives us the motivation to get out of the world rather than always trying to make the world a better place. Yes, we should make the world a better place. Of course we should, but that is not the ultimate purpose of the Dhamma. And so I made this point. And so then I made the point that secondly, we can do something in the world to make the world a better place, but one of the most important things we can do to do that is to practice the Dhamma in a deep way. And that is why the Buddha is probably the most important person to make the world a better place. Through reaching enlightenment, then you become that kind of person. And the Buddha had a powerful effect on the world just by being there, just by having this powerful qualities of a person. When people saw the Buddha, it was like, wow, yeah, there's something powerful going on here. And obviously he has changed history in a very powerful way. I read something or heard something quite interesting recently. There was a historian, he's a European historian. I really like this guy. He's he's a very interesting person in many different ways. And he said that during a talk that he was given, he was talking about the various people who are very important in the world history. And he mentioned that maybe the most important person in the history of the world was the Buddha. Yeah, he's a kind of European historian. I thought it was cool, yeah, for a European historian to say that kind of thing. Usually they would say something else kind of silly, like Napoleon or whatever. But he's actually said something. He said someone really worthwhile, right? And I like that. And so that's how you kind of get cred with me when you say that kind of stuff. So that was really cool. So anyway, so this is the Buddha beaming in the sky, someone who creates inner happiness, who creates happiness in the world, and actually leads the world in the right direction. So there we are. So that is what happened under the Bodhi tree. So this is the starting point of the Vinaya Pitaka, the Khandhaka section of the Vinaya Pitaka. So let us carry on a little bit more. So what happens after the Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree? Then what happens next is the following here. The account with the goat herd's banyan tree, the Ajapala Nigrodha tree here. And so then, after 7 days, the Buddha came out from that stillness, that samadhi, and went from the Bodhi tree to a goat herd's banyan tree here. Yeah? There too, he sat cross-legged for 7 days without moving, experiencing the bliss of freedom. So the Buddha is enjoying himself and obviously spending the time as well, with reflecting on the Dhamma and what is going on. Then a Brahmin devoted to mystical mantras went up to the Buddha, exchanged pleasantries with him, and said, "Good Gautama, how is one a Brahmin? What are the qualities that make one a Brahmin?" So the Brahmin devoted to mystical mantra, this is Bhante Sujato's translation, because he has translated this. These verses are also found in the Udana, and this is the Humkara Brahmana, that goes around saying hum. This is kind of a mystical mantra, yeah? So if you see someone going around saying hum, it's a Brahmin devoted to mystical mantras. I wouldn't be surprised if you see in India, you probably see this even in the present day, yeah? Because India is full of all kinds of holy people who do all kind of holy stuff, like saying hum, yeah? That's kind of what they do. And and this is kind of one of the fascinating things about going to India, to see all of these things, yeah? All of these kind of holy people, all the sadhus of India. I made a big mistake when I went to India, because I'm kind of Theravada. I'm used to saying sadhu all the time. Yeah, sadhu means good, yeah, whatever. So I said sadhu to people in India. They would give me something or become. I said sadhu, and they looked at me. Sadhu? What do you mean sadhu? In India, sadhu means holy person. Yeah, so I was going around saying holy person all the time. Oh, no wonder they were wondering what I was talking about. This is kind of when you get really confused and things are very difficult. So these Brahmins, they did all kind of things, and they were very into rituals, and they were into bathing in the river Ganges, and they were into mystical mantras to kind of, make things happen in the world. And of course, that is not the Buddhist way. So it's very interesting. This is the first kind of contrast with the ancient religion of India, the Vedas, now being contrasted with the new religion arising in India, the religion of Buddhism, the first time. So it's a little bit strange that he knows how to say good Gautama. Yeah, I don't know where he gets that from, because he just met the Buddha. How does he know how to say good Gautama? This is why these are stories, yeah, and they have obviously been added to and redacted a bit, because presumably he just says Venerable Sir or something like that. But anyway, whatever. And so then he asked the Buddha, yeah, what are the qualities that make one a Brahmin? And usually, this is not what a Brahmin would ask someone who is not a Brahmin. If you are a Brahmin, you go to your fellow Brahmins and find out how to practice according to the Vedas and all of that. So the fact that he asked the Buddha means that he also had a certain respect for ascetics. Yeah, at that time there was a Samana movement in India, a movement of ascetics and recluses. Who were practicing outside of the orthodox way of practicing. And they were often very interesting people, like the leader of the Jains, the leader of the Buddhists. And sometimes they would be very powerful people, in this case, the Buddha. So now he's actually asking the Buddha, what are the real qualities? Maybe he's doubting his own Brahmin lineage a little bit. We're just going around saying hum. Is that all? Is that all there's to it? Saying hum? There must be some more to life than saying hum. Yeah, it's kind of, I'm fed up with the hum. Maybe we can say some hum or something instead. I don't know. So what are the real qualities? And then the Buddha replies, seeing the significance of this, the Buddha uttered a heartfelt exclamation. The Brahmin who has shut out bad qualities, who does not murmur mystical mantras, but is free from flaws and self-controlled, who has reached final knowledge and has fulfilled the spiritual life, he may rightly proclaim the highest doctrine, having no pride about anything in the world. So this is the real Brahmin, yeah, from the Buddhist point of view. And it has nothing to do with caste. It has nothing to do with where you were reborn. It has to do with how you have developed your mind, how you have lived your life. And obviously, this Brahmin presumably will agree with that, that this is the real definition of someone who is special and who is above ordinary people. You have shut out the bad qualities, eliminate the defilements. You don't go around murmuring mystical mantras, because that doesn't get you anywhere. If you murmur anything, is that you speak the Dhamma. That's what you do. You're free from flaws and self-controlled. Self-controlled here does not mean that you are very controlled or very kind of tight and trying to control yourself. These are arahants. They are naturally self-controlled. And so again, it gives this idea that self-control, the real thing, comes from wisdom. And if you have high wisdom, it comes automatically. And this is why wisdom is so important in the practice, and why we try to understand how the Dhamma works. So the self-control happens as a matter of course. Who has reached the final knowledge and has fulfilled the spiritual life, that is the person who may proclaim the highest doctrine. That is what you should be murmuring. That is what you should be teaching. Actually, you shouldn't murmur. You should actually teach it out loud, yeah? And then you proclaim the highest teachings, having no pride about anything in the world. Yeah, you proclaim the teachings. You do it not from pride, not from defilements, but you do it in a way that is pure and bright. And then you are on the right track. This is the real Brahmin in the world. So you can see there's a new paradigm opening up in ancient India, the establishing of a new kind of teaching, yeah, it coming from insight and understanding. Yeah. The Brahmins become some of the main followers of the Buddha. Yeah, Venerable Sariputta was a Brahmin, Venerable Mahamoggallana was a Brahmin, they were a Brahmin birth, because the Brahmins were, some of them were already kind of religious seekers, and they probably understood the shallowness of some of the Brahmanical teachings. And so they sought, because these were the educated people in India, and they were the ones who had maybe most confidence probably as well. Confidence depends often on education and your social status. This is one of those kind of bad things about society, how we kind of get very stratified. If you are kind of have a low status, often also you're also lacking in confidence. It makes it more difficult sometimes to make the kind of decisions that are required to really move forward. Anyway, so these are the little things that are happening, yeah, after the Buddha's awakening. You can start to see how the Dhamma is taking shape, yeah. Some people may be becoming disciples of the Buddha. I don't know if this Brahmin became a disciple, but he was one of the first to actually hear the Dhamma, maybe the first one. Then we come to the next one, the next episode. I'm going to do this one, and then we're going to carry on with some questions afterwards. So this is the account at the powder puff tree. This is the Muchalinda tree. And this goes as follows. After 7 days, the Buddha came out from that stillness and went from the goatherd's banyan tree to a powder puff tree. There too, he sat cross-legged for 7 days without moving, experiencing the bliss of freedom. Yeah, going from tree to tree. I'm not sure. I wonder why that is. Maybe just to get this bit of exercise. I'm not sure. Maybe after 7 days, maybe you feel like stretching your legs a little bit. I can. So yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure about the significance of it. Maybe there is some kind of significance there. Not sure exactly what it is. Anyway, just then an unseasonal storm was approaching, bringing 7 days of rain, cold winds, and clouds. Muchalinda, the dragon king, came out from his abode. He encircled the body of the Buddha with 7 coils and spread his large hood over his head, thinking, "May the Buddha not be hot or cold, nor be bothered by horseflies, mosquitoes, by the wind or the burning sun, or by creeping animals or insects. So Muchalinda, the Dragon King, comes out to look after the Buddha. Is that true? Did that happen? Did the Muchalinda, maybe it happened, maybe, I don't know. I have no idea, actually. I don't think anyone was there apart from the Buddha and Muchalinda, the Dragon King, so it's hard to really know. I think that probably this is a story. It probably didn't happen quite like that. But it may have happened because in principle it is possible. Yeah, there are such beings in the world. So I think the principle, it is possible. But you don't really find the Buddha talking about this in the suttas. Yeah, the Buddha doesn't say that he has this kind of relationship with the king. So I think it is more likely to be a story than to actually be real. But I think the principle itself is not necessarily wrong. And so it's kind of hard to really be absolutely sure. But there is this feeling that the devas will look after you. Yeah, this is kind of the feelings that you have here. The dragons, the nagas, this is a dragon king, this is a naga raja. These are beings that are basically devas, that belong to the lower deva realms. And there is this idea, not just in Buddhism, but in most of the religions of the world, that you can be protected by the devas and by angels or whatever, if you are a good person. And of course, the Buddha is at the pinnacle of what it means to be a good person. And so quite possibly the devas would look after him. And so if you want the devas to look after you, would you like that? Who would like the devas to look after them? Yeah, one there, one there. Quite a few of you, yeah, okay. Why not, right? Why not? Why shouldn't we want the devas to look after us? It makes good sense. So if to do that, live well. Live with kindness, have compassion, have understanding for other people. Then maybe you get the devas to look after you. That would be kind of nice. And maybe you can get a kind of a super deva to look after the whole of the BF. What do you reckon, Pang Hong? The kind of higher devas, the higher angel, kind of look after the whole BF, right? So if you are a very good group of people, the more people who keep the 5 precepts, the more people who have metta and compassion, the more likely you will get this kind of super deva who looks after the whole of BF. And then maybe you can spread it out to the whole of Singapore, yeah, the Singapore deva. So it's like a hierarchy of devas. And I think that is not entirely wishful thinking. I think it is often the world is a little bit like that. And that is what we're seeing here. The connection between the deva realms and the human realms. There's much more connection than we think. And in Christianity, they have very similar kind of ideas. They have the devas that are personal angels. Angels and devas are basically the same thing, as I understand it. You have personal angels. You have what they call archangels who look after kind of larger territories. You have angels who look after whole countries, yeah? And then maybe you have the Brahmas who look after the whole solar system or the whole galaxy. Right? So you have this kind of expanding kind of hierarchy of devas that look after various kind of things. That's kind of, I don't know, I kind of like this idea. Anyway, what happens next? After 7 days, when he knew the sky was clear, Muchalinda unraveled his coils from the Buddha's body and transformed himself into a young Brahmin. He then stood in front of the Buddha, raising his joined palms in veneration. That's right, Anjali, right? And so he was obviously pretty much like a Buddhist, or at least revering some of these special ascetics. Seeing the significance of this, the Buddha uttered a heartfelt exclamation. Seclusion is bliss for the contented who sees the teaching that they have learned. Kindness to the world is happiness for one who is harmless to living beings. Dispassion for the world is happiness for one who overcomes worldly pleasures. But removing the conceit, I am, this indeed is the highest bliss. This summarizes in many ways the Noble Eightfold Path right there. Yeah, so it starts off with talking about seclusion, because obviously the Buddha now is secluded, living at Uruvela by himself, reflecting on the teachings. Yeah, seclusion is the bliss for the contented who see the teachings that they have learned. Learned here means understood. Yeah, so this can be seen in many ways. It can mean that you understand the Dhamma in a more superficial way by reading it, but most likely it means by experiencing it. So the Buddha here probably talking about his own situation. He has learned the teaching, understood the teaching, and for that reason he is entirely contented. And because when you are entirely contented, there's nothing of interest in the world. Why would you want to be in the world? Why would you want to live in the city? Why would you want to have people around you? They are just a nuisance, other people. It's true, isn't it? If you are completely contented, all other people can really do is they can just disturb you, really. You don't need them anymore. So if you're not entirely contented, okay, then it's important to have a 𝐾𝐤𝐚, it's important to have the BFE and the Buddha, etc. Yeah, but as you kind of move on, you want to go to the point when you are completely happy and content as you are. Seclusion becomes delightful because that contentment is then stabilized and brought even further when you are in seclusion. And then you can enjoy the bliss of that contentment, which is the jhana states and all of these kind of things. So when you are really contented, that's when you go into seclusion. That's when you are ready for it. That's when you really enjoy it. Yeah, the world is losing some of its allure. In fact, all of its allure pretty much. And then, so this is how you know how to move towards seclusion. Should you come to Jhana Grove on a retreat? Well, when you are really contented, yeah, you're really already moving towards contentment right here in Singapore. You're not allured by all the beautiful things that you see around you. So this is the beginning. And then comes like the gradual training after this. Yeah, kindness to the world is happiness for the one who is harmless to living beings. This is the sila part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah, kindness to the world is happiness. Kind of a very important point. If you want to be happy, be kind. The kinder you are, the more happy you're going to be. The beginning of happiness starts with the sila and the generosity and kindness. Then comes the samadhi part. Dispassion for the world is happiness, for one who overcomes worldly pleasures. The worldly pleasures are the problem, what stand in the way of samadhi. So if you want even deeper happiness, you go from the sila and you go to the samadhi, the deep meditations. That is the dispassion for the world. And then finally comes the highest kind of happiness, which is the removal of the conceit, I am, the ahang, the asmiman, the asmimana. The mana is conceit and asmi is I am. And so remove the conceit, I am. This indeed is the highest bliss. I am is a nuisance. I am is a problem. I am constricts your world, reduces your ability to kind of encompass the whole world as it actually is. I am makes you selfish. I am makes you self-interested. I am makes you identify with all kind of things. I am is a very big problem. And very hard to see this, but this is kind of the ultimate problem in Buddhism. Getting rid of that is the highest bliss. So isn't this a beautiful way of thinking about the Noble Eightfold Path? It just occurred to me now as I was reading it that this is the Noble Eightfold Path. It hadn't really occurred to me before, but of course that's exactly what it is. Yeah, when you see it there. Just a different way, a kind of poetic way of talking about these things. So sometimes poetry is nice, yeah, it kind of brings more emotion to it. If you say samma ditti, samma sankappa, samma, it's not very inspiring, it's kind of a long list of things, right? But this is kind of much a poetic way of talking about this, and it kind of brings it out in a different way. Okay, one more. I've forgotten how much material there is here. So one more before we kind of have a bit of a question. So I tend to kind of, yeah, it's only just over an hour anyway, so I think it's okay. So this is the count at the ape flower tree. Yes, another tree here. So sometimes when you do a translation like this, you come up with a Pali word, and then you have to figure out what the word is in English. And sometimes they have kind of strange names in English, like ape. I don't know what an ape flower tree is. It's just kind of a tree, but that's kind of what it's supposed to be according to botanists and things. So okay, you just take it on board. Anyway, after 7 days, the Buddha came out from that stillness and went from the powder puff tree to an ape flower tree, There too he sat cross-legged for 7 days without moving, experiencing the bliss of freedom. Just then the mendicants Tapussa and Balika were traveling from Ukala to that area. Then a god who was a former relative of theirs said to them, Sirs, a Buddha who has just attained awakening is staying at the foot of an ape flower tree. Go to that Buddha and offer him crackers and honey. That will be for your benefit and happiness for a long time. So this is a famous story of Tapussa and Balika that you often hear about when you hear about the beginning of the Buddha's dispensation. And they have a god who is a former relative. Yeah, isn't that kind of nice? Yeah, and that God says to them, there's a Buddha over there. Yeah, don't waste your time kind of doing merchant and selling stuff. Just go to that Buddha. So make sure you have some good relatives. You encourage them to be reborn in the Deva realm, right? So when they see a Buddha, they can kind of guide you in the right direction and tell you to go offer crackers and honey to that new Buddha in the world. So this is kind of nice. Yeah, so how your relatives look after you even after they have passed away. And and sometimes the Devas may have more insight into who are the Buddhas in the world because sometimes they can read minds or they can understand things from a different kind of perspective. And so they may have that ability to see these kind of things as they point them in the right direction. So I don't know, but how would you feel if some relative of yours kind of came to you and kind of, appeared? And we're talking about Uppul yesterday because Uppul passed away about a year ago, and I was saying that Uppul probably isn't here, but maybe he is here. And maybe he kind of comes. Imagine Uppul comes back, to the kind of BF and it says, and says to you, okay, now go and offer the Buddha has arisen in the world. Yeah, go and offer crackers and honey to the Buddha. Would you be scared or would you kind of think it's cool when that happens? It's cool. It is cool, right? It's cool in a certain way, but often it may also be scary because you don't really know. This is kind of very different from what you're used to. And so this idea of opening up the ideas to a larger sense of what the world is about, it gives you access to things that otherwise you will not have access to. This is anyway. This is what is happening. It seems to be happening. If things happen exactly like this, it's a bit uncertain, but it's an interesting story. And in principle, I think so. These things can certainly happen. They took the crackers and honey and went to the Buddha. They bowed down and said, "Sir, please accept the crackers and honey from us. That will be for our benefit and happiness for a long time." The Buddha thought, Buddhas don't receive with their hands. In what should I receive the crackers and honey? Then reading the mind of the Buddha, the 4 great kings offered him 4 crystal balls from the 4 directions, saying, "Here, sir, please receive the crackers and honey in these." After receiving the crackers and honey in one of the valuable crystal bowls, the Buddha ate them. It's kind of interesting here. Yeah, I think the Buddha already had a bowl because he had already been an ascetic for a long time. So I think he already had a bowl. But never mind. Yeah, it's a nice story anyway. That the gods continue looking after you after your awakening. And so the Buddha received the crackers and honey, and he ate them. When Tapussa and Balika knew that the Buddha had finished his meal, they bowed down with the head at his feet and said, "Sir, we go for refuge to the Buddha and the teaching. Please accept us as lay followers who have gone for refuge for life." By means of the double refuge, they became the first lay followers in the world. Yeah, so these are the first lay followers in the world. It's one of those tricky questions that you get. Who are the first followers of the Buddha? Yeah, and these are the right ones. It's not kind of the 5 ascetics. These are the first ones. And so this is kind of how the story goes. So it's nice. Yeah, they take refuge. So it seems that the idea of going for refuge and becoming lay followers was a thing that was happening already in India in those days. Because there were various kinds of ascetics, various kinds of religions, this is how people actually lived at that time. And so they did that. They had been in the presence of someone extraordinary, and they probably recognized that, and now they want to take refuge. One of the nice things that you will see here is that you go for refuge for life. Yeah, this is kind of this is what you find in the suttas, as long as life lasts. And that is an interesting thing that you don't often hear in the present day. People often don't say that. But that is what happened in those days. In other words, it's a real commitment. It's a real feeling that something is really happening. Yeah, it is not just, yes, I go for refuge or, whatever. It's actually a powerful emotional sense that now you're doing something very important. And for that reason, you're doing it for life. In the Velama Sutta, Sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, they talk about the various kinds of making merit. What is the highest kind of merit? They have a kind of a sequence, a hierarchy. And the highest kind of generosity is to give a dwelling for the Sangha, according to that. But higher than that is to go for refuge to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. Yeah, that's even higher again. And of course, if you go for refuge, the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and that is such high merit, it doesn't just mean that you recite the formula. That's not enough. Yeah, you can't just recite the formula. It means that you really feel something. You feel that you are doing something really important, something incredibly significant. And so this is the idea when you take the three refuges. Ideally, you should feel that this is actually here. I'm approaching something very important. This is what life is all about. This is what gives life meaning. Yeah, you should feel ideally maybe a sense of joy when you do this. Feel some kind of emotional connection to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha. This is what this really is about. And this is how you then go for refuge for life, because it is very important to you. So remember this. Remember that when you take this, when you go for refuge, and when you bow down to the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, remember what you're doing. Yeah, remember that this bowing, aspect of bowing, is paying respect to something very powerful, like wisdom, understanding, metta, compassion. And when you pay respect to these things, they also grow inside of you as a consequence. Okay. So that is the two first lay followers in the world. And I am going to stop there because I've already gone over a little bit over time according to the schedule. So, yeah, so let us do some question and answers if anyone wants to ask about anything. Maybe this is the right time. So does anyone like to make any comments or say anything about this?
Can I start? So the total number of days when the Buddha, after his enlightenment, did not eat anything was the 3 weeks before Tapussa and Balika came.
Yeah, that was what it may seem like. I'm not sure if it is as simple as that. I'm not sure if we can come to any absolute conclusions about that. There may have been other things happening. Maybe the Buddha went Pindabata after 7 days. Maybe that's why he went up. And maybe he went Pindabata into the village, and they gave him food. And maybe Tapussa and Balika are mentioned because they became the first disciples, not because it was the first food. So I don't think you can draw any absolute conclusions from that. Yeah.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Hi, Ajahn. Thanks for the sharing. I have two questions.
Okay. Sadhu. Yeah.
First question is you mentioned the enlightenment is like a flash.
Yeah.
So it's not like a permanent change.
It is a permanent change, but the insight, the kind of what happens on the night of awakening, that insight is like a flash. It has a permanent effect on you. So afterwards, you're never the same person again. So you have ended all the defilements, and that's all gone. But that actual insight is not kind of that mind state you have at that time is not always with you because you wouldn't be able to do anything. Yeah, because that happens when you are in complete stillness and peace and sitting cross-legged, and happens in your mind. So that mind state you have at that time, it does not carry with you in exactly the same way afterwards.
So we have to really catch that flash.
You will. You don't have any choice. You will. I guarantee you. You will catch that flash. Yeah, it's not going to be here. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Then my second question is about the 12 links.
Yeah.
Is a reflection. It's not a seeing, because in your translation is a reflect on the 12. So it's not a seeing.
Well, it is a seeing in the sense that what you see is that's kind of the point. Yeah. So you have the awakening experience is that is dependent origination that you see. But it hasn't been articulated yet. Yeah, you have to put it into words. Yeah, because the words don't happen. And insight is not words. Insight is like a direct seeing of something. It's very different from articulating it. And so that insight basically is that craving leads to rebirth. That's what that insight is. How do you articulate that insight? Well, you come up with this 12-link dependent origination, because that shows you how the process works. It shows you what you have to do. You have to get rid of avidya at the very beginning. It shows you how this whole, how dukkha is sustained in the world. And because it shows you how it is sustained, it also shows you how to give it up. So this is one of the reasons why it is so hard work to be the Buddha, because you have to articulate all of these things. It is not easy. Yeah, 10,000 pages of suttas have to be articulated. One of the things about that you see in the suttas, you often see people going, not people, the Buddha going on retreat. And this is almost like the first retreat of the Buddha after his awakening, is they kind of sitting under those trees. And the Buddha does this quite regularly. And so what does he actually do? And I think maybe one of the things he does is to kind of review his insights, how to articulate these things, what do they actually mean, and then kind of maybe give new teachings on that basis. Maybe that's what he does. It's just speculation on my part, but that's just a possibility anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Ajahn Brahm.
Hello. Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Okay, good. Yeah.
Sorry.
Good. Excellent.
It just
Yeah.
slipped my
Yeah.
mind. Okay. Sorry. This first question. You mentioned a flash just now. Is it actually within your mind, or is it outside, like even
It's in your mind.
in your mind? Okay.
Yep.
Then my next question is, when the Buddha was sitting under the second tree, which is like the goat herd tree, that one, the Brahmin approached him and asked him, what is the definition of a Brahmin?
Yeah.
And he described that. Is that actually, is Buddha actually describing an arahant?
Yeah.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And he says that the Brahmin would be free from, free from flaws and self-control. Yeah, that was that sentence. And my question here is, what is free from self-control here? Because is it actually the sense of self? Because self-control to me, I would think that we're full of defilements. We actually lack self-control because we're just falling according to our feelings, and we're just letting it being tossed around this thing. So we lack self-control, but here we have to be free from self-control.
It's not free from self-control, it's free from flaws and self-controlled.
Meaning that we are we are
You're not free from self-control. No, that would be
confused. Thank you.
But actually, it's a good point, because in a sense you are free from self-control. That's kind of the interest. Actually, thank you for mentioning this, even though it was kind of slightly misconstrued. It was still actually an interesting point, because normally the way we think of self-control is that I control myself to make sure that I don't fall for the defilements, I don't get angry and these kind of things. That's the normal way of thinking about it. But actually you are at this point, because you know, and because you have eliminated those defilements, you don't have to self-control anymore. It happens automatically. So you are self-controlled, but it's an automatic self-control. And that's why you are free of the oppression of always having to guard yourself and to be careful. So there is a point there. So so thank you for that. Even though it was inadvertent, it was still an interesting point. So that's good.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Yeah.
We often hear about the story of Sujata offering milk rice to the Buddha.
Yeah.
How does that fit into the story that you have just told us?
So that story happens before the Buddha's awakening, right? So this story begins after the Buddha's awakening. That happens before. And that is also a very, very beautiful story. That's whole everything that leads up to the Buddha's awakening. And there, the Buddha, not the Buddha, the Buddha to be, because it's not yet the Buddha, he reflects. Yeah, he has then tried to practice all the self-mortification, all the tormenting of the body, and he thinks, well, I've taken that to the extreme. If I take it any further, I will die. Yeah, that didn't work. Then he reflects on his lay life. His lay life kind of took all the sensual pleasures to that didn't work either. And then he thinks, is there another way to awakening? And that's where he understands actually the jhanas are the way to awakening. And then he thinks, but this body of mine has been torturing himself so much, it's completely emaciated. I cannot attain those jhanas with this kind of body. That's a very interesting point. So if you want to attain deep meditation, your body has to be in the right balance. You have to find the middle way for the body. This is why you don't indulge in the senses, but nor do you deprive yourself too much. You find the middle way where you are in balance in a sense. And that's where Sujata comes in, because Sujata then provides him with the nourishment to get back in balance again, where you can attain those deep stages of meditation. Now, where does the story come from? That's probably also what you're asking. And that is a commentarial story. It doesn't actually exist in the suttas. In the suttas, it just says that he took some solid food. It doesn't say who actually gave that. So someone must have given it. So we can give her the name Sujata, yeah? And then we are in business. Yes, then they have Sujata given for it. It doesn't really matter so much, right? Because what are the names? Who are the people? Very likely it was a woman, because they would normally do the cooking in those days. Yeah, so quite likely it was a woman. That's kind of sometimes we think that okay, being a woman you have to do all the cooking, don't want to do all the cooking. But if the Buddha comes to your house, it's a pretty big benefit, right? So maybe at that point, being a woman was a kind of massive benefit, because then you could offer some food to the Buddha. I don't know. It just depends on how you look at things sometimes. So yeah, happy. Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah.
Okay, I think we will stop there for Q&A at the moment, and we can continue after 1 o'clock, Ajahn.
Yeah, good. Yes, thank you so much, Eileen, for knowing the limits. So that's good. Okay, so yeah, so please carry on. We'll see you back again at 1 o'clock this afternoon. So great.
Ajahn will take his leave and have his lunch. And the rest of us will be doing self-sitting. We will ring the lunch bell at 12 when the food is all ready. Thank you.